This was the beginning of me understanding, holy shit, it's not about me, it's about we. It's about me serving the song, serving the music, serving the artist, serving the band, serving the producer, serving everybody. It's like not about me, it's about what can I do to get this song on the radio to be a #1 hit.
Everybody, it's Kurt Newman with the Staring at the World podcast. Today's guest, Mr. Kenny Aronoff, legendary rock and roll drummer and a great friend of mine. He's been playing with us for many, many years, and we talked for a long time. So we're going to have two parts, part one and part two, talk about stories from the road and touring and all those great fun events that he did out there, as well as playing with BoDeans and my experience with him. And so tune in, listen in. This is part one of Staring at the World with Kenny Aronoff. Welcome, everybody. This is Kurt Newman, and you're staring at the world. This week, a very special guest because he's a good friend of mine as well as just a legend in the rock and roll industry. And I don't say that lightly because he's been the most top list in-demand drummer out there for, 40, 50 years, something like that. He's played with everyone. If I read the list, it would take the whole interview. So I can't read the list of everyone you've played with or recorded with or toured with. But everyone from the Beatles to BoDeans to Bon Jovi and everyone in between you could possibly imagine. There's probably a good chance that Kenny Aronoff has been playing with him. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Kenny Aronoff, rock and roll.
Thank you.
Drummer.
Hey, that's awesome introduction. But anybody who's watching this, it's a fact that I've played or recorded with the BoDeans more than any other band in my history. It's pretty amazing.
That is amazing. We've known each other a long time, and we've done a lot of work and a lot of miles together. And your book is the Sex, Drums, and Rock and Roll, which you put out, was that about 6 months ago? I know it's in audio form recently because I listened to it.
Yeah, 6 months ago with the audio, but the actual hardcover came out maybe 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah. Oh, really? Wow. Well, time passes fast. Well, anyways, I was, I've heard all these stories. Well, not all of them. I heard a lot of stories from you when we're driving from town to town, and it's incredible stuff. But there was quite a bit in the book that I really didn't even know about you or your time. So I wanted to interview for this because I think it's an amazing story. And because I know you well, and I know a lot of these stories, I wanted to go through them with the fans, and people listening to this podcast can get a good hand look of what, the perspective is there. And so I want to go way back before we get into all the cool rock and roll stuff to your most humble beginnings in your childhood back in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, which sounds like it was an amazing town. I literally part of a Rockwell painting, considering he was one of your residents and someone you grew up with. So tell me about Stockbridge. Tell me about your time there and the crazy stories growing up and how fun it was.
Well, it was a small little town of 3,000 people in the hills of Western Massachusetts, 3 hours from New York City, 2 hours from Boston. And it was kind of this like little utopian town. I mean, I didn't know any different. I thought the whole world was like that. But the thing that was unique about that town is there were a lot of artists, painters, sculptors, actors that would come up in the summer to do summer stock. They'd have these theaters there. The Berkshire Playhouse was literally a half a mile from my house. And a lot of famous actors would come out of the city to come up there to do plays. Right. It was kind of just to get out of the city. So, I mean, it was nothing. I mean, I'd be hanging out, as you read in the book, with my buddy whose dad wrote The Miracle Worker, Bill Gibson, and his friend, Arthur Penn, the director, did Bonnie and Clyde and did Little Big Man and also did The Miracle Worker. So I'd be hanging out at be 13 years old and all of a sudden, oh, there's Anne Bancroft. Oh, and there's Mel Brooks. And then oh my God, who's this gorgeous woman? It's Faye Dunaway. I
Yeah.
mean, I remember Tommy, my friend's mom would go, who was a well-renowned a psychiatrist who helped develop hypnosis, and in the world of therapy. And she goes, "Hey, Kenny, do you think this woman's beautiful? I mean, come on. I'm 13, you can imagine." And so, and then as you had mentioned, I mean, when I was a little kid, I'd go to my parents were friends. Everybody was friendly in this town. Didn't matter if you were poor or middle class or had money. It didn't matter. Everybody just, it was like Andy and Mayberry. There was no lights in the town. It was one city block. We'd have Memorial Day and the whole town would converge and we'd go to cemetery with a marching band. And I mean, it was just incredible. And anyway, we'd be over at this guy's house, Norman Rockwell, who'd be painting, and I would be stealing cigarettes from back then.
Yes.
And they'd had these pewter dishes they put cigarettes in. And I said to my brother, keep his attention. I'd steal cigarettes. And the reason why it wasn't so I'd smoke, it was to give it to my best friend who would give it to his brother, who I was terrified of. He was just a bully. And I was just trying to get in good with him. And it
Wow.
gets deeper. I mean, and his dad was Officer Obenheim, Officer Obi in Alice's restaurant. That's
Yeah,
another
yeah.
thing that was in.
Right,
I
right.
used, I used to hang out this little restaurant, little teeny, like little, I mean, literally, it's just very small. And this lady, Alice, who eventually, a very famous story, Arlo Guthrie was friends
Right.
with them. And there was a weird, they they had a Thanksgiving in a big church, and they were all getting stoned and high or whatever. And they went to the dump in a big Volkswagen bus to dump the trash. The dump was closed. So what are we going to do with all this trash? They dumped it over an embankment. And the funny part is, all their mail was in the trash. So it's pretty obvious where it came from. So it's a funny story about how, and, this
Community.
town, yeah, it's
Everybody
just
knew everybody.
yeah.
And we got to play there. BoDeans played there. We played a show at the theater there once, and I remember the whole town was, it wasn't that BoDeans were coming to play a show there, it's that Kenny Aronoff was coming down
Oh, yeah.
by in the theater, and that's where I first got to meet your identical twin brother, John, which
Yeah.
was, ladies and gentlemen, look at Kenny. There's an exact copy of that out there.
Yeah.
It is mind-blowing to see. When I first saw him, it was like, wow, I can't imagine the havoc you two reaped upon that town, with your
Yeah.
crazy, crazy energy. Because one of the things you talk about in the book is the insane energy you had since you were a kid and finding an
Yeah.
outlet like that. And you list off 100 different things that you did to burn off that steam. Your parents keeping you outside all the time to play. So now double that with your brother John, and I'm sure the entire town knew what was going on every day with you two racing around and causing
Yeah.
trouble.
Oh, absolutely. And in high school, we were very popular because of that. There was two of us.
Yeah.
We were high energy, happy kids. We of course had to play sports. I mean, that was just the only way. And my parents definitely encouraged us to play sports to burn off that energy. And basically, my day was like, school, sports, homework, and then I had a barn on our property, and we would have a rock and roll band practice there, and everybody from all over the little teeny area towns. So these towns were like 2-3 miles apart. A lot of mill towns back then,
Yeah.
and that's what my dad was in the paper business. So there'd be like this river, and I think you and I have talked about it because we played in places in Vermont and up there in northern Massachusetts,
Yeah.
and these, how the rivers would run by these mill towns,
Yeah.
and they dump their mill debris in there. And anyway, so they'd come to our house, and our house was the place, be drinking beer, smoking pot. We were so stupid because my dad, there was no like blinds on the barn. My dad
Yeah.
would walk around and he could see what we were doing, but they were cool in that regard. It's like, oh, if you're gonna drink and you're gonna smoke pot, I'd rather my
Yeah.
boys were at home. And
You said that they were pretty liberal people and
yeah,
open-minded in the book. And like I did, you know, you told a very common story about the AM radio being a big influence on you back there. But you talked about in the story specifically what really kind of got you started was your mom calling you to the living room one night when the Ed Sullivan Show was on. You want to
Yeah.
talk about how that influenced your life and seeing that?
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, I mean, we were always outside, but one of the big reasons we were outside, besides burning off energy, there was nothing to watch on TV. I mean, there was nothing to watch. So we were out there. So one day my mom is yelling at us from the porch to come in the house. And we immediately thought we were in trouble, which was usually the case. But anyway, we were frozen in our tracks and going, uh-oh, we're going kind of figuring out, did you do something? I don't know. I probably did. I don't know. And then when we go running into the house thinking we're going to get lectured, and she's pointing to this black and white RCA TV set with the rabbit ear antennas
Yeah.
and
Know them
tinfoil.
well.
Yeah, right, exactly. So we're giving away our age. But anyway, so and she's pointing to this TV set, and there's these four guys dressed in suits, and they're not like the normal suits that your dad would wear. They were like really hip rock and roll suits, and you know, they looked cool, and they had long hair, and they had electric guitars and bass, and Ringo, I didn't even know who they were yet, and the drummer's way up on this huge like a riser that
Yeah.
looked so cool. I mean, that was like amazing look, the way it looked. And so all of a sudden, you know, I don't know if it was Paul or John comes up, and whoever's saying, "She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah." And they break into this rock and roll. Now, we'd heard rock and roll, but I'd never seen it. So I'm completely electrified and blown away. And you know, my adrenaline's flying. I'm passionate. All I know is at that very minute, I went, I got to do this. I don't know who they are. I don't know where they're from, but I got to do this. And it was probably, that was the moment I realized what my purpose in life was before I even knew what those words meant. So I mean, I've just got to do this. So I'm like, Mom, who are these guys? She says, well, they're the Beatles. So at being a 10-year-old kid, I went, well, call them up. I want to play in that band. You know, I mean, come on, let's do this. I mean, think about it. There was no YouTube, there was no internet, there was no TikToks, there was no Zoom. I mean, what do you do? So at 10 years old, you ask your mom, hook me up. And so, and not only that, but like, how am I going to see them again since there's no internet?
Yeah.
How do you see them live? I mean, I didn't know what to do. All I knew was, oh my God, they're slipping away from me. And I wanted to do it. So I went, hell with these piano lessons crap. I want to play drums, you know?
Yeah, you saw Ringo.
So, yeah, and he was just so cool, you know, to watch. So I said to my mom, look, I want to play the Beatles, call them up, and I also want to play drums.
Make it happen.
Yeah, she obviously didn't call up the Beatles, and she didn't give me a drum set, and I was really bummed out because I didn't know what to do. Well, how do you pursue this? So they saw that I was really into this so much that I convinced them to get a snare drum and a cymbal in New York at Manny's. You remember Manny's music store?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. For the people listening, that in New York City, there was 48th Street, and they had the hippest music stores back then, and Manny's was one of them. And they used to sell mostly, you know, all instruments, but you know, they were catering to the jazz world, the classical world. But when rock and roll hit, all of a sudden they were importing all the drums, like the Ludwig drum set that, you know, that Ringo played. And anyway, my mom and dad got a snare drum there and a cymbal, and I started my own band. The first band I ever had was called the Alley Cats, and I played standing up. We didn't have money, so they weren't going to buy me a drum set. I remember my mom said that the guy, Manny Wolf, maybe was his name, said, she said, I don't know, man. I don't know if my kid's going to like this. Mrs. Aronoff, if your son doesn't like this drum, you bring it back and we'll give you back your money. Who the hell does that?
Yeah, it was similar for me. I in school, they came in class and one day and said, if you want to take musical instrument lessons, we'll let you out of class for an hour, you know, each week. And my hand was like up in a second. I was like, yeah, like, what do you want to play? I'm just like, what do you got? You know, and then I picked drums, same thing. I
Yeah.
got a snare drum and that was it. That's what I
Yeah.
got. But so that's what
Yeah.
I had to work with. So when I heard you tell a story in the book about that, I was like right there with you because I
Yeah.
literally had made coffee cans into my toms and stuff at the time because I
Yeah.
couldn't afford a drum kit either. My parents didn't have the money for
Wow.
that as well. So
Yeah.
one thing you said about it though that really caught my attention was when you said you were playing with the band and playing music with the Alley Cats, you said that you beat that snare drum like an escaped mental patient. And I laughed out loud because
Yeah. Nothing's changed. That's true.
because when people ask me, "What's it like having Kenny play behind you?" I thought, "That's it. That is exactly what it's like. That's the best description." So you really nailed it on that one, Kenny. I really appreciated that. But you were working with what you had, right? You know,
Yeah.
you had the snare drum
Yeah.
and you're playing in the Alley Cats, and you tell me what you're playing. How was it going? You know, how were the gigs?
Well, so we were playing Beatles music, and so I mean, I would just shut my eyes and think I was in the Beatles. And so one day, the piano player's mom called up my parents and said, "Listen, I'm part of the Grange meeting in a small New England town like this. They would have a meeting of the elderlies that would discuss, how to keep the town preserved and." Just different things, who
Yeah,
knows what they talked about,
right,
like the
right.
dump, the police, I don't know, whatever. And Mrs. Sauer, the piano player's mom, suggested to these people that her son has a band and they could come and do some entertainment for us. So we get a call, and I still remember, oh my God, I'm packing up my gear, a snare stand, a snare, a cymbal, and a cymbal stand. And it was like, it could have been, Neil Peart's kid at that
Yeah,
point.
yeah. That
We
was
go
your
down
rig.
there. Yeah, it was my rig. Everything was like so exciting. We get down there, we set up, and we play all our 5 songs. People are going nuts because once again, rock and roll was this new thing, and now they were seeing it in person, and we were playing the Beatles songs, which was all over the radio. A Hard Day's Night I think it just come out, and that was in the theaters. This was a big cultural thing. And in my town, since we were such a liberal town, people were open, everybody, adults, all ages were into the Beatles. It was a perfect storm. And so after we got done with the 5 songs, I remember thinking I was in the Beatles. I was completely, in love with what was going on. And they want us to keep playing. So we played the same 5 songs again. and, and that was it, man. And okay, so I'm in this small town. I still don't know how you make it. So, look at playing the drums. If you think about it, you want to break it down to this: playing the drums and sports increases adrenaline. It increases your dopamine, serotonin, and oxycodone, or whatever that
The
natural.
pleasure in your head.
Yeah. So that, if you think about it, I was just drawn to that because,
Yeah.
hey, why not go toward things that feel good?
Well, there was
Playing
one other
sport.
thing, though, that you did mention in the book when you saw the Beatles playing. You said you saw the girls were all screaming for the Beatles,
Oh,
and
yeah.
you said, "Mom, I want to be a rock and roll star."
Yeah.
So I imagine playing a show like that, people watching you and some of the attention from people in the audience probably helped fuel some of that,
Yeah.
those receptors that were getting the dopamine.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I did leave that one out. It was sports, music, and chicks.
Yeah.
I mean, no question. I mean, it was like, oh my God. I mean,
That's why
you
the
know what it
book
was like.
has
We
the
were so
title that it
popular.
does. The book is
Yeah.
Sex, Drums, and Rock and Roll.
Right.
After, all of that playing in all the high school sports and drumming and the Alley Cats band and stuff, you finish high school and there's this little thing going on you talk about in the book called the Vietnam War and the Vietnam draft and things like that.
Yeah.
And it just seemed like music was a part of how you were going to maybe escape that, possibly getting killed in a war. You said you did show up for the draft and deal with it, but it was pursuing music, I think, going to a college and classical music that you were going to pursue. that kind of help you, motivate you, get you going in a direction after high school? You want to talk
Mm.
about that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, there was no school of rock when I was a kid, and
Right.
so in our family, that was just the thing you do. You go to college. So I'd been taking some lessons from the percussionists from the Boston Symphony Orchestra and studying. Like I had a set of vibes. My dad got me in it, I think in New York City, and I had some timpani, and I was learning to read. And so I thought to get once you get out of high school, I'd go study music. I thought that'd be cool, but it was classical music. But I'd still playing drums all over the place in rock bands and fusion bands and jazz, but any band, I didn't care. But I barely got into a school. It was University of Massachusetts. It was more of an educational program, and then transferred to Indiana University for 4 more years, which was the #1 school of music in the country. And that's where I really got my ass kicked, and where this is where I had my teacher. There was no hand holding. There was no, there was no coddling, and there was no, validation.
Right.
It was like, this was Marine style. This was hard knocks. And this was like being in the Navy SEALs, which was great because I was a perfect person for that program. Because if he said do practice 10 hours, I'd say yes sir, and it paid off because in many ways. But yes,
Did you have the full drum kit by then and stuff? Because for me, I was still
yeah,
playing drums coming out of high school and stuff, but I only knew how to play by ear. And what I think you're saying is
me
like,
too.
yeah, you learned all the like, oh, sure, I can play that, and you do it. But when you got into this system, now you're talking about where
Mm,
probably don't let you play by ear anymore. I know they didn't,
yeah,
when I got to college, they were just like, we want you to read. And I was like, I'm out of here. But you kept
yeah,
on going.
yeah. I didn't see the option. Once again, unlike you, I didn't have a band that was like writing songs that would get,
Yeah.
for people who don't know, for Kurt and me, the business model was you write songs and you could get a record deal. And when you get a record deal, because people were buying records now in the millions, labels had money. And Kurt, you're the one that told me this. It takes money to make money. You
Yeah.
said that. We were driving down, any business, it takes money. So if let's just say this, the record label, a typical deal would be labels making 82 cents on the dollar. They would give, I don't know what your deal was, but I think with Mellencamp, it was 18 cents for him, but he had to give three of that cents or 3 points to the producers. So John was left with 15 cents on the dollar. Now, if so, John sold, a couple of 3 of our records sold at least 2 million. So you do the math, 6
Yeah.
million times 82
If you're a
cents.
songwriter, you can,
Yeah,
or if you're the
yeah,
artist, you
yeah.
absolutely can be making a living off your music back then.
But
We'll put a
but
disclaimer.
yeah, back then. But think about what the
But
label
as a
had. So
drummer, you were thinking, I need to study
yeah,
classical, I need to read music. And that's when you talk about like military style boot camp, that's what you were
yeah,
going into. And that's where they weren't
yeah.
going to take any excuses for not learning it,
No,
right? But you learned a
no.
lot of stuff in those years. I mean, you told me that it was a cello player that led you to go off to college at first, which you were
No, no.
following
To Aspen, to
to
Aspen.
Aspen. Okay, that's what it was. Yeah, that's right.
Exactly.
That's right.
I was following the chick. Yeah, I was following the chick. She basically said to me, "Hey, what are you doing this summer?" I said, "Well, I'm going to study with the percussionist from the Boston Symphony Orchestra, and I got this cool Allman Brother band. I was always in a band,
Yeah.
so it's my summer was set." And I said to her, "What are you doing?" She said, "I'm going to Aspen." I went, "What's Aspen?" She said, "Oh, well, it's a summer program with an elite orchestra that you have to audition for, but it's run by Juilliard." Now you have to understand the top 3 schools in the country were Indiana University, Juilliard, and Eastman. I tried to transfer to Eastman. I got in, but they didn't have room for a transfer student, so I couldn't go.
Right.
Now she telling me Juilliard, I'm going, oh, I'll go to Aspen. I'll get to hang with her, and I'll try to transfer to Juilliard. Well, I get there, and she didn't show up. And and here's Yeah, I know. And here's the wild thing is like the last day of school, I still hadn't heard from them. I was on my way out of the campus with my dad's car with all my stuff. And I went, oh shit, I forgot my mail. I better check one more time. I go back and there's an acceptance letter from Aspen. I'm like,
Wow.
what? And I have to be there in 2 weeks. So I think I was an alternate. And the other reason why I think I'm an alternate is because I was by a long shot the worst percussionist there. My reading skills sucked. These guys had been playing timpani and mallet since they were 8 years old. You know,
Yeah.
all they did was classical music their whole life. They were way, way advanced. I got my ass kicked there. So I mean, in some cases, or in most cases, I bet you people would just give up. I mean, I
Yeah.
saw people at
Oh,
Indiana
yeah.
University. Yeah, they just
Sure.
like, I'm done with this. This is
It's
bullshit.
hard. Yeah, it's really hard. And they don't want to hear any excuses at all at that point, right? They want you to do
Nope.
it. They want you to perform.
Yeah.
And if you saw the movie Whiplash, it's kind of
Yeah.
like that, you know. That
Yeah.
was my similar experience in trying to play drums in college too. It's
Yeah.
intense. And it's
Well,
a lot of work. But there was
yeah, I mean,
another cello player there that you
yeah.
met, right? Is that
Oh my
correct?
God, there's there's 3 cello players. The second one I
There's
met in
three.
yeah, there's 3. I don't know if I put this one in the book, but this is from the
No,
people who didn't read the book.
this is an
So
extra.
yeah, all right. Now is this the one that I dated her, and when I broke up with her, she became a nun? Do you know
Uh,
about that one?
I
Yeah.
don't. I know that you said there was another cello player in Aspen that was way out of your
No,
league, but somehow you managed to become really good, close friends with her.
that
And
was Tanglewood. That was Tanglewood.
okay. And then there's a third.
Yeah, but the one I was dating this really hot ballerina, and I don't know, whatever, something didn't go right, and this cellist that wasn't as gorgeous, but she was very cool. I started hanging out with her, and then next thing I'm spending the night there, and then eventually I kind of missed the ballerina, so I did the typical, and I left the cellist, and I heard a couple years later she became a nun.
Yeah.
So I may have put her into the nunnery.
Way to go.
Yeah,
Maybe it was a good thing though, you know. Maybe it gave her
yeah,
some direction.
she was very spiritual anyway. She came from a family of spirituality, and
Yeah.
so now the other cellist. Oh my God, there's a place called Tanglewood, which is the
Yeah.
elite orchestra in the country, run by the Boston Symphony Orchestra. I auditioned one year for Vic Firth, the guy who makes the
Right.
sticks. He's the timpanist to the Boston Symphony Orchestra. I auditioned, I sucked. Came back the next year, struck out. Came back a third year, still didn't get in. Came back, and then I started studying with him in the summer, timpani.
Yeah.
This guy is like one of the greatest timpanists ever. Then I audition the fourth year and I get in. So they only take 7 percussionists in the whole world. I mean, and I got to work with Leonard Bernstein,
Yeah.
Aaron Copland. And let me tell you you don't want to make a mistake. And if you do, or if they have a word with you, we're talking about a 75-piece orchestra.
Yeah.
See, a guy like Leonard Bernstein, if he tells you, I want you to do it this way, you do it that way exactly, because he's got 74 other people he has to deal with.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to waste any time coddling, or he tells you that's it. If you don't do it, holy shit, man, you're fired.
Yeah.
And anyway, so one day, very quickly when I got to Tanglewood, I noticed there was this cellist carrying a cello on her head, but she was built like a supermodel and was wearing a mini skirt, and I'm like, oh my God. And not to incriminate anybody, but one of my mentors said, one of my mentors said, who's spending time with that woman? I said, I know. He says, your assignment this summer is to spend time with that woman.
Wow.
I went perfect.
Wow.
And eventually we did.
That's not an assignment you get from a teacher every day. That's for certain.
No, that was that only time that ever happened.
And so you spend all this time then really getting into the classical world
Yeah.
and really learning it and developing your reading skills and stuff and playing with orchestras. But in 1977, you decide, I'm going to back to Bloomington and I'm going to join fusion rock band Stream Winner. What is
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
Like, because
Yeah.
let me get it
Yeah.
straight. You saw Billy Cobham playing and you
Yeah.
thought, this is what I really want to do.
Yeah.
Even though you had gotten all the chops, were learning all the chops for classical, you decided like, well, I want to do this other thing over here. So you went to the Midwest and joined this fusion rock
Yeah.
band and started living in what you called the Roach Motel. You want to talk about that
The
experience?
Roach Motel, that's because there was 7 of us living in this was like classic, a band house
And this is
of
going from the classical music world,
yeah.
folks.
All right, so there was 1 year before. What happens, I got into the Jerusalem Symphony Orchestra. I
Right.
mean, it was like, man, I mean, that's like, my parents were like, wow, you went from you could barely play classical music to getting into a symphony orchestra, and there aren't that many.
It's a big
And
deal.
it is a big deal. And I turned it down, which shocked me, shocked my parents, shocked all my friends. They were like, what? And here's the takeaway from that is I was actually, without knowing this, I was actually following my heart. I still
Right.
wanted to play in the Beatles. In
Right.
other words, the classical music was great. It was a time that I felt like I was being productive. I didn't have a band like you had, where you were a songwriter, you were writing songs I didn't see that. I couldn't see that.
Right.
I wasn't able to view that. How do you do that? Let's write. So I went, well, I'll study. You know, at least I'm working hard. I've always been that guy where as long as I'm working hard, I feel good. I know you're that way. That's
Yeah,
our
absolutely.
generation. When you're doing something, you're being productive, you're being rewarded with a sense of worth, self-worth. That's why I cannot relate to lazy people. I cannot relate to entitled people. I cannot relate to people looking for handouts. I just can't relate to that. I would implode if I was that guy. I just wouldn't do it.
Right.
And so I'm just not wired that way. And, and so I went home humbly. I basically turned down certainty, a gig, money, Jerusalem Symphony Orchestra, credit. You could tell people you go from one orchestra to the next. I turned down certainty for complete uncertainty, which was, now what? I moved back home, started practicing 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, but this time I started studying with just drum set teachers, one in New York, one in Boston. Then I moved to Indiana to form this band because we were going to write songs. We were going to get a record deal. Now I'm finally ready to make that move, write songs, get signed,
Yeah.
make a record, go on tour, and then repeat that cycle. But after 3 years, our music, like you said, was fusion music. We weren't writing songs that were very radio friendly.
Yeah.
And yeah, Billy Cobham. When I saw Billy Cobham play with Mahavishnu Orchestra, for people who don't know who he is, look him up.
Yeah.
Billy Cobham, Cobham. It was like watching a running back in football, but with the speed of like Buddy Rich. And he was right-handed, left-handed, ambidextrous, and technique was extraordinary. I'd never seen anything like it. So I stupidly was trying to be him, which was a mistake because I would never be him. In the book, I think I mentioned he almost ruined my career. Yeah.
Well, he had a massive drum kit, and
Yeah.
you probably had a massive drum kit too. And this all, you were playing with great musicians. It was probably musically technical music and Stream Winner and stuff, and it was fulfilling on a musical level. But you heard of an audition with a Johnny Cougar guy there in Bloomington as well. And so you thought, well, maybe instead of just pushing myself musically, I should hook up with a songwriter here and see how that goes. And I read in the book, you talked about going out for the Lou Rawls audition and stuff like that. And that I just shook my head at too, like Kenny Aronoff behind Lou Rawls. I couldn't really put that together. And you say in the book, like, well, Of course not. And you come back and you get an audition for Johnny Cougar. You want to talk about that here and tell people what
Yeah.
his response to your drum kit was like and stuff?
Oh my God. So, dude, I was not cool at all back then. I mean, I didn't dress. I was more of a into music and not focusing. I show up, I've got a beard. I actually had a beard.
Wow.
I was balding, I show up in a car is leaking oil on his driveway. I take I set up my drums. Well, he saw this and he saw me, and I go up to him, I go, "Hey, John, nice to meet you." He looks at me, goes, "John Mellencamp," turned around and walked in the house. I went, "Wow,
Yeah.
holy shit, this guy's not a happy guy." So I set up this massive drum kit, double bass drum, 3 roto toms, 3 rack toms, 3 floor toms, cymbals everywhere. And John, I didn't know it, John hates that. He likes
Yeah.
the Ringo Starr, Charlie Watts simple drum kit. So already he didn't like me at all. But with that classical training and all that discipline, I had been practicing songs off his the record at that time. Oh my God, 8 hours a day. I'd walk out of room and run in the room and name a song and play it note for note without hearing any music. I'd sing the song. So I knew every drum part those drummers did because I wrote it out on a piece of paper.
Right.
And so when I got there, they said, well, I said, "What do you want to play?" He says, "Well, do you know anything off the album?" And I went, "Yeah, kind of." I completely crushed it. And I thought I was already a loud player and a real aggressive and passionate player. But I thought, oh my God, these guys play in the big arenas. So I was playing so loud and so powerful. I broke cymbal, broke sticks. I might have broken a head. And I remember I'd never seen John look like this before. He was looking at me. His mouth was wide open. His eyes were bugged out. And he was just like, who the hell is this guy? And so then we did one more song, and then he gets up and walks upstairs, and all of a sudden I hear him go to the guitar player, "Mike, get up here." And I'm like, wow, Mike must have really done something wrong. So I'm packing up thinking, I got to do this. This is it. This is the Beatles. This is, I grew up playing in rock bands like this. This is where I belong, but they got a record deal and they just got off the road with Kiss and they're on MTV and they're on the radio. I'm like, this is it. This is what I want to do. So Mike comes down 10 minutes later and he smiles at me and he shakes my hand, goes, "Welcome to hell." I went, huh?
Yeah.
What?
Everything you
So
want.
I had no idea. And here's the bottom line. 5 weeks later, we go to Hollywood to make a record. We're staying at the Chateau Marmont Hotel on Sunset. I tell everybody, oh my God, I'm going to be on TV. I'm going to be on a record. I'm finally where I belong. This is like my dream come true. And after 2 days of recording, I'm fired from the
Yeah.
record.
Now, you told me that story long, long
Yeah.
ago about it,
Yeah.
and it was you said a little bit that it was almost as if the drum kit got in the way, though, and your kind of lack of experience of just being in the studio and how to record. And so, like 90% of the producers do when bands come out to record their first record, they get rid of the
Right.
drummer and they pull in their guy who can get the
Yeah.
tracks real quick with the sounds they want real quick. And but you don't leave, you stick around, right? You want to learn.
Yeah.
And
Well, I was like, see, when John, by the way, it wasn't John that was wanting me to go. It was
right,
Steve Cropper, the producer.
right,
Because like you said, he's the producer. He's got 8 weeks to this record. He's like, I can't wait around for this drummer to learn. And it's true. I didn't have any experience. And at that point, it was all about me, which it is when you're learning your instrument. It's all about you. You're just focusing on you.
yeah,
But this was the beginning of me understanding, holy shit, it's not about me. It's about we. It's about me serving the song, serving the music, serving the artist, serving the band, serving the producer, serving everybody. It's like not about me. It's about what can I do to get this song on the radio to be a #1 hit. That was the lesson. And
yeah.
thank God I didn't go home, because when John told me, "You're not playing on the record and I'll pay for the week, but you go home." And I went, no fucking way. I mean, I'm not going. And the reason why is because I didn't know it at the time, but I look back and go, oh man, he was trying to take away my bliss, my purpose, everything I ever wanted to do. And I was done. I figured this is it, man. And so I was negotiating a deal that I thought would serve us both, which was, all right, first thing I go is like, listen, I mean, I got into that fight or fight mode. It's like, hey, am I still your drummer or what? And he's all perplexed and he goes, well, yeah, but you're not playing on the record. And went, well, and I'm fumbling for words. I'm going, well, I'm going to go and watch these other drummers play and I'll learn from them and I'll get better and I'll benefit from that. And you'll benefit because I'm your drummer.
Yeah.
And then he didn't say anything. And I'm like, shit, like, all right, you don't have to pay me and I'll sleep on the couch. He went,
yeah,
okay.
Say that to John. He's like, okay,
perfect.
very good.
You know? Oh, it was horrible. I mean, for 4 weeks I stuck around, but I did learn a lot, took notes, and then I went home and went, all right, now I have to figure out how to be the best Johnny Cougar drummer I can be, which meant forget about Billy Cobham. Now it was Charlie Watts and the Stones, Doug Clifford with Creedence Clearwater. What's his name? Phil Rudd from AC/DC. In some cases, John Bonham. Anybody that was playing drums to serve the song, Ringo Starr with the Beatles. You know, it just was being a drummer that has the right feel, the right tones, the right parts. And that was the beginning of me understanding what a drummer does in a band.
And in the studio, which is a very kind of different dynamic, you're always trying to capture a live feel in the studio.
Yeah.
But doing that in the studio takes some real experience because it's sometimes not, what works on that tiny little stage doesn't always work in the studio. Yeah. And so you have to learn the experience of it. And like I said, most producers fire the drummer. That was like a common thing in our era, the 70s, 80s, 90s in the studio. It happened all the time. And they would pull in their guys. And it's hard for bands because you want to maintain some kind of cohesiveness in your band, but the producer has just got to get his job done. And so you talked about when you got into the studio with John Cougar finally again and recording Hurt So Good and learning about simplicity and all of those things. And I think that's what we're talking about, basically. Like you went to the Charlie Watts style and immediately things started clicking with Cougar then, right? You did a lot of touring and recording from then on with that same kind of style and sound. I think, though, it really did develop into a Kenny Aronoff thing. You may have had to go through Charlie Watts' kind of style of playing to learn to do it, but after a while, it became the Kenny Aronoff sound.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, the thing that makes any musician unique is that they're all different. We're all different. We have different personalities. I obviously have a very strong personality. I mean, I don't take credit for it. I was born this way, and so, but thank God, I'm great. I have to thank my parents for creating me because that energy, that thing it's a perfect instrument to be that guy. And even, I mean, the point is that you're right. And once I had vowed that I would be on the next record after I got fired, which was 2 years later. It's a long story, but obviously I recorded John's biggest #1 hit single, Jack and Diane, and that drum solo and that whole thing came up on the spot under pressure to basically save the song or to save my career. I mean, I walked in one day and the co-producer had this metal box and I went, what's that? And he went, oh, Don says it's a Lin 1 drum machine. The Bee Gees are using it next door. And I'm like, drum machine? I'm like, a drum machine replaces drummers. I'm like, I got replaced by 2 humans. Now I'm going to get replaced by a machine? I went, hell with that. I grabbed the machine, went into a fight mode again. Like I'm freaking out. Like, no, I'm going to program it. I got to be part of this. So, making that record was the hardest record I've ever made in my life. John was going through a divorce. John almost died on a motorcycle accident. And I didn't notice, but John was about to lose his record deal again. And he was not a happy camper. He was miserable. mofo, and he was begging for ideas from us. And so anyway, the bottom line is I created that drum fill. And so I was just glad, all right, I'm on the song. And then I'm like, all right, it made the record. But as you well know, so the radio would play, they had two formats back then. The singles radio, they would play all the hits.
Right.
Then
CHR.
they had and then they had album-oriented rock where they would play all the songs. And then people would call up and they'd make their requests, or the radio people want to know what you liked on that record. And Jack and Diane kept scoring huge points.
Yeah.
So they released Hurt So Good because that was an obvious single. They had also tested it on the market. Oh, by the way, you'll love this part. The record label, I don't know if this is in the book, but the vice president of the label came and listened to us when we were overdubbing or mixing Hurt So Good. He went, nah, I don't get it. You guys don't, I don't get it. You know, John, you should be more like Neil Diamond. And John just walked him to the door, kicked him in the ass out onto the street. And we lost our
It's
our
another
record deal.
common story about being in the music industry. You have to work with these people in the record company who sometimes are musical, but sometimes they're not. And yet they're the ones in charge of your record and whether it's going to get anywhere or not, or whether they're going to put money in it or not. And so John was dealing with that. He was a stress case. And so you're dealing with it through John as well.
Yeah. But when they released Hurt So Good and it got to number 2, it was Eye of the Tiger that kept it out of number 1. But, you know, Rocky had just come out.
Yeah.
And I remember asking somebody recently, I said to a record label guy, I said, could they have like put in, you know, $1 million to get that song to number 1?
Yeah.
He said, absolutely.
Yeah.
But there was, I'm not going to mention the name, but there was the people that were behind Eye of the Tiger were basically the mafia. So probably Polygram went, we'll let this one go.
Yeah.
I mean, and so Jack and Diane's testing really high. They release it, goes to number 1. So my point of the story is the record before I'm Fired. Now I'm on John's biggest number 1 hit single, and it features the drums. So out of nowhere, it's like, who's that drummer? And John's career completely, he won 2 Grammys, sold millions of records.
Yeah.
And from that point on,
but to get to that point, and you told me this early on when you were first fired from the record and stuff like that, you were just an 8-hour-a-day machine in a practice room, really fine-tuning your sound and your style. And I guess to Mellencamp's sound a bit too, but that style of rock and roll drumming with simplicity and focus and how you strike the drum and stuff instead of many fills, how you strike each fill and make the most out of saying the least, because some of those parts, when those Mellencamp songs start with the drum beat, you know who it is, which is what I've tried to do on guitar a lot as well. It's like when that song starts, I want a lick to start it that's like Honky Tonk Woman, that you know immediately what song that is, because it gives it your personality, and that's what makes it really special.
Absolutely.
This has been Staring at the World podcast. I hope you enjoyed our interviews with Kenny Aronoff. Man, what great stories, you know. I was lucky to be part of it. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you can hit that subscribe button and join us for future podcasts, because we're having a great time talking to really interesting people and telling great stories. So please join us.